Well, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. This is the 86th Fireside Chat. We welcome you all here today. And our hearts go out to the loss of your queen in the United Kingdom, Queen Elizabeth. That was a sad thing to hear today. We have a new member of our Fireside Chat group, Lucian. And so we're going to start with you, Lucian. So Lucian's question is in relation to my experiential bubble of experience, where do other consciousness experiences take place? If consciousness is one, how can there be anything outside my own consciousness? What would divide my experience from your experience if location doesn't exist? From a subjective standpoint, how could I ever verify the existence of other consciousnesses? After all that appears as other could be just a part of my own imagination, in a sense that I, as the LCS, I am just imagining there being apparent other self-sovereign consciousnesses, while in reality, I, as consciousness, am one, and so am the only being in existence. Can you comment on that, Tom?
This question actually in philosophy has its own topic. It's called solipsism. And it's one of these things that keep showing up from time to time in all different arenas. And that is things that are theoretically possible. In other words, they're logically possible, but they're just not likely. They have lots of problems as far as actualizing that possibility. The idea of many worlds is like that you spin off almost an infinite number of complete universes just because you decided to sneeze or not sneeze, those sorts of things. And it's not that that's impossible, it's just that it's highly unlikely. It's very inefficient and it doesn't solve any problems and takes huge amounts of resources and has lots of other practical problems with it. So there's many things like that, and this is one of them. No, you cannot take solipsism and just throw it out because it's logically impossible or theoretically impossible, because it's not. And as he says, how can you prove that my consciousness, that I'm not the LCS? Let's put it that way. How can you prove that I am not the LCS? And I am just imagining all these other facets. They're all part of my consciousness. Okay, well, theoretically, you can't say that that's impossible. It is possible. It's just highly, highly, highly unlikely, to the point of most people don't go down that path because it is so unlikely. Okay, if you were the larger consciousness system, then why would you be trapped in this one perspective as Lucian and not the greater perspective? Why couldn't you just get that greater perspective? And the larger conscious system has a lot of things it has to keep track of. It has to run a virtual reality. It has to create data streams. It has to send all those data streams to all those people that define what their reality is like. And of course, you could be doing all of that somewhere in the background of your mind that you're unaware of, but not so likely. Not so likely. Why would you pick Lucian and be unaware of all of the things that you have to do, very complex things and things that require a great deal of focus and so on? And why would Nathan feel the same way, and Donna and I and Will and the rest of us here? We all would feel exactly the same way, that we were the larger conscious system, and you, Lucian, were just a figment, one little tiny figment in our imagination. So now you have, at least on this planet, almost 8 billion larger consciousness systems. And everyone is doing everything. Now, there's a logical problem there, isn't there? Everyone is doing everything. See, there's a lot of repetition going on here. We have a huge amount of recalculating, each one of us being the LCS, just recalculating a whole lot of the same stuff that everybody else is recalculating. So though that is not logically impossible, It just doesn't make good practical sense that a system would work that way. It's too inefficient. And one of the basic rules of physics is called Occam's razor. And what that says is that if we're talking about things that are fundamental, then those things are probably not complicated. Those things are simple and elegant. Fundamental things aren't full of lots of complexity. If you can't understand what's going on in physics without 20 pages of mathematics, that is not fundamental. That's mining for logical consequences of things that are fundamental. And all of that mathematics is basically the pick and shovel work of applied mathematicians called physicists who dig out those little pieces of those little nuggets of how the rule set works. But basically, things that are fundamental are simple and elegant. And having everybody doing everything all the time doesn't fit into that elegant and simple. It's hugely complex and hugely inefficient. So to answer your question, there is no way to prove that you're not the LCS. But it's just not likely because your own view is so limited. You run into people all the time that have bigger and better ideas about things and know things that you don't know and so on. And there's lots of things that you would like to know that you don't know. You might like to have a very in-depth understanding of philosophy, but unless you study it, you don't have it. Whereas it's all in there because all those philosophers lived a life and it's all in that database and you'd know everything if you could just access it. So why would a larger consciousness system limit itself to one small piece called the Lucian when it has so many things to do that involve all the other pieces? All the contrived, what do we call it, synchronicities, where the system just kind of puts you at the right spot at the right time to help you learn something. Well, there's 8 billion people, and a lot of those are having synchronicities, and the system has to work all that out, plus all those data streams. The system is a very big and busy thing, working at speeds that we can't even imagine, billions and billions of times faster than the fastest computer that we can imagine. So possible, but it doesn't make as much sense as that each of us are a part of this larger consciousness system, but an individual part. Okay, just like you have a computer, and in that computer, you maybe have 20 different Word documents saved in your computer. Okay, now, maybe each Word document thinks that it's the only thing in there. It may not be too aware of the others, but they're all part of the ones and zeros in that one computer. They're all part of that one computer. If that one computer fails, all those Word documents disappear at the same time. So they're all part of that one thing, but yet they're separate. They're different documents talking about different subjects. You see, so we're the same thing. It just makes more sense to me to look at it differently than solipsism and say that we're all unique in that we're all virtual machines within a larger mainframe. Put it in that set of metaphors. A virtual machine is when a bigger computer can emulate a smaller computer. So we're all subsets of that bigger thing. And that's how we're all one. But we all have our own perspective, our own data, our own experience, and our own level of entropy, where we are in the evolution process. But we're all part of one bigger thing. So that, to me, then you can take that and derive a whole lot of things that are interesting, like we're here to lower entropy. We have this virtual reality because it helps the system lower entropy. All sorts of things then fall out of that idea, whereas if it's solipsism and everybody is everything, everybody's the LCS, then there's not a lot else logically that falls out of that. It doesn't take you very far. It's like the assumption that, well, God does it. How does this work? Well, God does it. How does that work? Well, God does it. Why am I like this? Well, God made it that way. And that's a very simple answer for everything, but it doesn't dig very deep. It becomes an answer that isn't very helpful. It doesn't help people live their life any better or know, what the next choice is or how to make that next choice. So it's not that you can say, well, God does it, it's just wrong. That's logically impossible. It's another one of those things that said, yeah, well, okay, God does it. So now where do we go? You see, whereas if you have a model where you can derive, say, ethics, you can determine what's right, what's wrong, and why it's right or wrong, and what your point and purpose is, and why it is you're unhappy, or what you need to do to find happiness and satisfaction. Now you have lots of information that can help you in your life. So it's not that solipsism is wrong or that God does it is wrong from a philosophical or logical perspective. It's just that it's like the zero order answer, and it doesn't give you much to work with after that. It doesn't lead to a whole lot of interesting things. So for that reason, I kind of pass solipsism by and say, well, it's not all that interesting because it doesn't really lead logically to things that people need to know. It's too big, just one big statement overall, and then you're kind of done. So that's kind of my comment on that. Not impossible, just kind of a zero order answer that isn't particularly useful, and it's there though. There's lots of those sorts of things running around in our reality that are possible but unlikely.
So two questions on that. Did you personally ever had access to any other bubble of consciousness, or like to anybody else's experience, like connecting with that or becoming that while still being your piece of consciousness? And the second question on that is if experience is always going to be subjective and singular for all of eternity.
Yes, your own consciousness is subjective. Okay, it's internal. Now there's a subjective world and an objective world. The objective world is the stuff, the bricks and the buildings and the cars. It's our bodies. It's that objective world. That's the virtual world in a virtual reality, and that stuff actually doesn't even exist. It's just virtual. It's just computed. And to answer the first question you just had, yes, I have experienced other people's experiences, other people's minds. You can share another person's consciousness if you like. You can do that, but generally there's not a lot of good reason to do it. There's no point for it. It doesn't really give you anything or take you any place, but I've done it just because as I was exploring and trying to understand consciousness, I tried everything. What can you do? What can it do? What are the limits? And in those explorations, I did all kinds of things and experienced all sorts of things that I don't then practice or I don't do daily. You just let them alone because they're not really very valuable. Where the value is in other people isn't getting inside their minds. It's reacting to whatever they toss your way in a positive way. So you have positive reaction, positive connection to whatever they send to you. That's what's important, not really what they're thinking or why they're thinking it. It's that you react to it with caring. That's so it's all about your reaction, how you react to things. Now you care about people. You'd like to be helpful. You'd like to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So that's an important thing to do also. But your perspective is always just your perspective. And you cannot, in general, have another person's perspective. You can in special cases, if you can do that with your mind, where you can go kind of get into their data stream, and not only their data stream, but how they interpret that data stream. You know, the old, what was it in, you know, the old Vulcan mind meld, right? Where Spock would put his hand on your head with some kind of strange way, and then he could tell everything that you were thinking, you know, that old Vulcan mind meld. Well, you can sort of do that with your mind. It doesn't take a hand to do it, but you can do that sort of thing. Yes. But it's like I say, it's not particularly a productive thing to be able to do.
Well, the thing that I was contemplating is that if consciousness is one and I'm consciousness, there must be this stuff behind the scenes like the LCS, which technically then holds all experiential bubbles at the same time. But it must be also me, because I am part of that. So what is like, what's the barrier between me and that? I don't see any border to my experience. So it seems like there is this something that I can point to, but only believe it is there, but I cannot actually bring into my direct experience that there is this something outside of myself, which is really not outside of myself. I think it's just like it has more bandwidth to and more capacity to experience all these reality frames at the same time.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not going to be your direct experience. Okay. It's just a matter of seeing what seems to be more likely. You know, a lot of our life, we have to just guess about what's most likely, what seems to be the best explanation for how things work, what leads us to the most useful answers. And we work from that. A lot of things we do in the subjective world is not based on direct experience. It's our looking at all the experience and then making sense out of that, the way that it makes the most, you know, the most sense. So I just think of it as I'm a virtual machine inside a larger machine. Now, you know, where's the boundary there? Well, if I'm let's say a subset, then we have metaphors like you partition off a part of a larger system to make a subset of that larger system, and then that's the smaller system. So I'm a subset of the larger system. Now you say, well, what's the physical boundary between me and the rest of the system? There are no physical boundaries. It's not physical. So you're not going to look at it and say, oh, there's the boundary. It's that black little dotted line there around Tom Campbell. You know, it's not a physical system. There are no boundaries that you can see, but I'm just a subset of that bigger system. Now that's how I look at it, and that kind of satisfies me. But if that doesn't satisfy you, then don't look at it that way. Look at it in the way that you find satisfying, that makes sense to you. That's the whole point. It's not to believe that somebody else knows more than you do. It's for you to come up with your own sense of what's true in reality. So I don't want to talk you into or out of anything, but it's just different ways of you modeling reality. So you have to make a model in your own mind of how reality is. And that model needs to give you guidance about how you are and how you should be and what you're doing here and what, you know, what's the point? And if it does, then fine. Doesn't really matter so much what your model is as long as it works for you.
Okay. And in an information system, does that mean that like all the locations of all the experiences are superimposed on top of each other? So in case of me, like having to look into your life, I would have to become you, but it's in the same here and now that I'm experiencing myself right now, isn't it?
Yeah, see, superimposed is the wrong word. Superimposed is a word that only makes sense in physical reality. It's a spatial thing. You know, here's this thing, and now this is, you know, superimposed, this one superimposed over that one. One put on top the other. It's a spatial, visual thing. And in consciousness, there is no space. So superimposed doesn't work. But now if you use superimpose the metaphor, which means they're both there somehow inside the same system, then sure, superimpose the metaphor works just fine.
Yeah, I just mean it's all in the same here and now that I'm already experiencing.
Okay.
It's just that I try to like grok, like in relation to my own experience where everything else takes place, but not in a sense of physical location, but just in a sense of, it can't be outside. It's a digital information system, so it must be in the same place where I already am, that everything else also takes place.
Yeah, it is. And that's what I call the larger consciousness system. But you're not it. You're just a piece of it. And so is everybody else.
Is there a transition to becoming it eventually?
Well, you become more and more like it as you evolve. It's a piece of consciousness too, and it's still evolving. You're a piece of consciousness and you're evolving. And you get to the point where you've evolved to about the same level it has, then yes, you're about like it.
Okay, I don't want to steal everybody's time here. I will contemplate on your answer. So, thanks.
Thank you, Lucian, and thank you for joining us today. Next, we have Marla's question. Please go ahead, Marla.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Marla.
Well, you touched on things because of Lucian's question. So this is great because you mentioned deriving ethics, the right and wrong, and of course, responding positively to whatever somebody tosses our way with our reacting. But here's my question. How can we, as this consciousness community, address all of the pain that is at the root of this deep-seated fear that keeps morphing into this hate, this action of hate?
Well, that hate or that thing that makes us frightened or that fear that we have, that's ours. It's not that's imposed on us. That's our interpretation of the things that we experience. It's how we react to, how we interpret the things that we experience. So we're the ones that create that fear in our mind. We look at it and say, oh no, I don't want it to be that way. That's wrong. That's just wrong. I want to change that. Well, that is your reaction, is to want to reach out and change it. In other words, you'd like to be the master of the universe, where you could set everybody else straight and tell everybody else what to do, and that would be good for you, but you're not. So you have this problem. Now you live in a world where things are not the way they should be, and that's a problem. You see, well, the problem is that you can't just accept that the world is the way it is and deal with that positively. You have a need to go out and change it, make it better. Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with trying to make things better, but it depends on how you go about that. Now, if you make things better by grabbing people by the throat and shaking them, that's probably not going to help in the long run. That's just going to make everything worse. If you make things better by being a good example of the right way to be and letting other people just learn from it as they might, or maybe opening a conversation that presents a new idea to someone and give them an opportunity to take that step in that direction. And then if they do, good, then you can maybe say the next thing and helps them take the next step. But if they don't, well, you leave it alone. You don't pursue it. You don't get to the point that you grab them by the throat and shake them and say, you must agree with me. Because everybody on every side of every issue feels that they are right and that everybody that disagrees with them are wrong. And if we all tried to go out and force ourselves on everybody else, all we would have a free-for-all fight that would never end. It doesn't get us any place. It doesn't go anywhere. So that fear comes out of a sense of wanting to be the master of the universe, of wanting to control things, of wanting to, make things better the way they should be. Well, you can't force yourself on other people. You can't overrun their free will, no matter how wrong they appear to be. You just can't. It's just not what works well. You have to stay positive. And that's the challenge, because in order to stay positive, you have to turn that ego down. You have to turn those beliefs down. I believe I know what's right. you have to turn that belief down. You have to be skeptical of yourself as well as other people. And now you maybe have a way, if you get rid of that ego and that belief, now your fear's toned down too, because that fear and that ego and that belief's just there because it's being blown up by your fear. So that's how all that goes together. So yes, it's good to go out and want to change the world for the best, but you have to do it in a way that's positive and caring, not in a way that's pushy and overrunning other people's free will. Now, there may be a few exceptions there. The exceptions would be if you're an adult and you have children. You don't always let your children, do what they want to do. You overrun their free will and say, no, you will not play in the street. No, I am not, giving you a hunting knife for your 3rd birthday, No, I'm not going to be doing these things. So in that case, you do run over other people's free will because they're children. Okay, now once those children grow up and they're 18 or 21 or whatever makes them a legal adult, wherever you live, then you have to treat them differently. They're no longer your children. And hopefully, since they were, very young, you've helped them learn how to make better choices so that by the time they are an adult and have their own free will, that's now, is how they're going to do it, well, that they'll make better choices. So you have to help them learn to make choices, not just always run over their free will and tell them what to do, because then they'll get to 18 or 21 and they won't have a clue how to live their life because somebody always has made all their choices for them. So you see, there are exceptions. So yes, if you're out there and in the world and you see, 3 8-year-olds beating up a 5-year-old, yes, you should go over and stop it. You see, because that's not right. And you're an adult. And if you see a bunch of, adults beating up somebody else too, if you could stop it, you probably should. But if you can't stop it, then there's no point in making it worse. There's no point in just throwing fire on that problem by doing things that you're just one more person in the fight then. You see, now let's say you're 10 feet tall, weigh 400 pounds and all muscle. Well, you can just walk right over there, pick up the perpetrator, shake them a little bit, spank them and send them home. But if you're not, if you're a little woman, then maybe you should think about, staying on the sidelines, getting out your camera, taking pictures for evidence later, do whatever you can do, but don't make it worse. You have to realize there are times to act and there are times not to act. That this MBT is not a pacifist philosophy. We don't say never do anything violent, Sometimes violence is necessary. But the key thing here is to know when it is and when it isn't. And if you think you're the master of the universe and you can use violence to make everybody do the right thing, then that's not the right application, you see? So that's the tricky thing, because until you grow up, you don't know the difference between when you should intervene and when you shouldn't. Once you've grown up, then it's a lot easier choice. But if you have ego and you have fear and you have beliefs, now you also are much more likely to want to intervene by running over other people's free will. So there's no easy way to say, well, here's when you intervene and here's where you don't. It's a situation by situation call that you have to make and make very carefully.
Well, that's a really good point. A situation call. Mm-hmm. So I look at that as, growing up, as we are doing in this work, mm-hmm. growing our consciousness up. The ethics of what we think might be right or wrong is very subjective, as you say. Mm-hmm. But as this community, it's, we have to hold ourselves to the fire. We're not walking around and using our little pointers and pointing. Sometimes we'll use fingers and there's always 3 pointing back at ourselves. but the dynamic of this is, I wonder where this comes from, Tom, because it's like, when we were in school, we had somebody always monitoring us. We've had parents monitoring us, and then we get to a certain point in our own lives where we don't have parental figures, and the people that are older than us, who the hell are we going to trust? That's why we're sitting here talking to you, right?
Mhm.
But it's fascinating to me as to how, and maybe it's the internet with the ability to be able to talk. It's as though we don't have a voice in our family. Oh, we have an opportunity on internet in a Zoom. What do you think about the need for us to like get out there and start, yakking away? And
Yeah. Well, the way it works, Marla, is that, this problem of when do you intervene and when do you not, how far should you go, how much should you say, when should you be quiet? All of that comes down to you having to make a choice. And you'd like to make the low entropy choice. And not just low entropy for you, but low entropy for everyone, low entropy for the system and for you, both. And you'd like that low entropy choice to be a long-term choice, not like, well, it's low entropy in the first 10 minutes and after that, it goes really wrong, or vice versa. It might be higher entropy for the first 10 minutes and after that, for the all time, it's much better. So you have to look at the entropy over a long term and say, what is my best choice here? And don't be afraid to make choices when you don't know what the entropy is going to be like. You don't know. You don't have a crystal ball. You don't know how things are going to work out. So you just do the best you can. All right, Marla, you do have a crystal ball. Okay.
I was waiting for that.
Anyway.
Hello.
Yeah, but the crystal ball doesn't tell all about everything. It's just
not everything.
It's just a selective crystal ball.
Thank you.
Anyhow, the point is that you should not feel like, well, I can't make a choice because I don't know the right answer. Make your best choice. Think about it. Go through your mind. Is this going to be good for everybody for the long term or not? And if your answer is yes, I think this is the best thing to do, then just go do it. But always be aware of how that worked out. Look back at it. If you said, all right, I see these people and I think what needs to be done, somebody needs to go over and bash the heads in of those 5 guys, right? That's what needs to be done. Well, if that's your low entropy choice, then go do it, girl, and see what happens.
I'm not a head basher.
Right. But see where that gets you. See whether that raises entropy or lowers entropy. It'll probably, most of the time, if you do things like that are physical, will raise entropy. Now suddenly you've got 25 years in jail for aggravated assault, and it goes on and on and on. And those people that got hit, they're twice as mad as they used to be. And the whole thing is higher entropy. But when you think about it, you just make your best guess and you go do it. And then you look back and then you learn. And that's the point where you grow up. You look at it and say, okay, maybe I shouldn't have jumped into that argument. My mother and my sister were having a fight and I jumped in and then there was a 3-way fight. And what did that solve? Where did it go? Was everybody happy at the end because I jumped in? Or was everybody more angry because I jumped in? You see, then you learn from it and you say, well, I won't do that again. When I'm in that situation, next time I just won't do it. There's you growing up. You've learned something. So we make the best choice we can. Then we look at it and see, how did that work out? And then we try to make a better choice next time. And we just keep doing that. And goodness knows, in 10, 20 years, you've grown up a whole lot. And you can see it looking back, but you couldn't see any of it going forward. All you could see is you were trying to do the best you could given the situation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Marla. I think Marla's, because of who she is and what she does, she's trying to reach out to that pain that's palpable that the intellect can't reach. Her whole thing is empathy for it. How do you move that? But what you're saying is it's the individual's responsibility. And they're the only ones that can reach out and do that
Well,
and
well,
try to deal with
well,
it.
not necessarily. You can help people with your mind. You can give people just make them feel better, relaxation, able to see the bigger picture. And you can do that just from mind to mind. You can go to them, give them a hug and say, everything's going to be all right. And that'll help them unwind from being wound up tight. So there are things you can do to be helpful to people that lower entropy and that are not invasive. They don't overrun anybody's free will. Now, if you go mind to somebody and say, here's what you should have done, you should have done this. Well, now you're trying to overrun their free will and tell them what to do, telling them how to live their life. That's not a good thing. That's high entropy. But if you just try to help them, you help heal that wound, you help, you help them feel a little better, make them more able to deal with that problem themselves, then that is lowering entropy. So there's lots of things you can do in the physical and in the non-physical that are helpful. But you have to it's always the same thing. You don't overrun their free will, except in very exceptional circumstances when you think it's the right thing to do, and then you do it and see how that works out.
That's perfect, Tom. That's just right. Thank you. Next up, we have Will Thomas. Hello, Will. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Tom. How are you?
Good, Will.
I got a couple questions for you, Tom. So a couple weeks ago, I got COVID, and I wasn't sleeping well. I was feeling really bad. And I found that I was very short and kind of irritable to be around, especially around my rather young and willful children. And so that made me realize that, the thing is that when I meditate, and I meditate a lot, when I meditate, and these things happen, and I don't know, my son takes a handful of sand and throws it in my daughter's face, and she's crying, and just being a kid, but I mean, still, that's not okay to do that. And usually I'll just be like calm and like, no, that's not what we do, and go settle down. But then when I'm feeling really sick and I'm feeling bad, and I'm like, Dad, how many times have I told you not to do that? And I kind of I got really upset, it really kind of was getting to me. And so the question is, Tom, what is meditation? What is it doing to us? The question is, which one of these people am I? Am I that calm person that's, it's fine, and let's all just be loving? Or am I that person, you little, like the angry Homer Simpson trying to choke the Bart? Which one am I? The answer is I'm probably both, but then that makes me really understand that I don't understand what meditation is and what it is doing to me and who I am in the middle of that whole thing. And so I don't know what you're going to be able to say, but if you can kind of point me in a direction, I would really appreciate any insight.
Yeah, okay. Will, I think almost everybody here can identify with the problem. I think everybody here has times when they are all full of love and wisdom and good thoughts, and other times when they just lose it and are angry and upset and do things that are not very positive. And that's because we are a mixed bag of high and low entropy attributes. We are not just all evil or all good. There's some good things in us, some things we appreciate, some love and caring and things going on there. And there's some fear and ego and self-centeredness that's in us that makes it all about us. I'm not feeling good, leave me alone, that sort of thing. Well, it's all about you. You're not feeling good and you want to be left alone. So you're angry with other people. So we can express, all of us, the angry part, the belief part, the ego part, the fear part, and the love part, and the caring, and the empathy. We can express all of that. So when we're at our best, which is probably why you're meditating, when you're at your best, you tend to be serene and calm and have bigger perspectives, because that's the space you're in when meditating. When you're doing meditation, you get out of the little picture and get into the bigger picture. That's what meditation really is. It's a leaving the little picture behind and becoming aware in that bigger picture of consciousness, where you're one, where you're connected to everybody, where you're looking through lenses that are very positive. And then when you're upset or angry or feel bad or whatever, then you're looking through lenses that are dark, that are negative. You see everything as a problem. So it's not that you're a different person. It's just that different parts of you, different sides of you kind of dominate different situations. And when you're feeling miserable, you tend to be more negative. Now, I have a daughter who occasionally gets hangry. And what hangry is that when you're hungry, you get angry. And she was always like that when a child. When she would be hungry, even when she was 3 or 4 years old, she would get, hard to deal with. She was just negative about everything. No matter what you were doing or where it was, she just didn't like anything, anybody, anyway, anytime, negative, because she was hungry. So we called that hangry. And anyway, that was just when she wasn't feeling good. When she was hungry, she wasn't feeling good. So we knew to always have enough supplies along so that she never got to hangry, that there was always something to fix that problem nearby. So it's just the way we are. You're all of that. Yes, you're all of the above. The meditation doesn't change you. The meditation doesn't make you grow up. The meditation just connects you to the larger reality and kind of turns off the connection to the little reality, from the big picture to the little picture. But you can live in both. And as you grow up, that big picture starts to be more and more dominant. And there's fewer and fewer times that you get upset and angry in the little picture. That little picture is because that you're coming from ego. I don't feel good. I need you to be this way. I need you to be that way. It's about me, not about you. I know you have a problem. Get over it. Suck it up, cupcake. I have the problem, and you need to do what I want. I have a headache, so leave me alone. You see, it's just self-centeredness. Well, that self-centeredness is just there. But when you're in the little picture tends to work with your ego, with your beliefs, with your fears, and all of that gets expressed. When you're sitting there meditating, you leave all that stuff behind. Now you just are in that big picture, a piece of consciousness interacting. And it's all the same you, but growing up, has to happen because you want to change. You can meditate 6 hours a day for your entire life and never grow up much. You don't grow up just by meditating. You grow up by seeing things that you're doing that are dysfunctional and high entropy and changing yourself so you don't do them anymore. And you don't want to do them anymore. And they even just don't come up. Again, it's not about behavior. It's not that you suppress your negativity and smile even when you want to grit your teeth. That's not the point. That's civilizing, but it doesn't help you grow up. You have to be positive, not just act positive. So that's what growing up's about. So that positive big picture view dominates your life. And that negative little picture view just comes in every once in a while when you're not feeling too good and you're hungry or some other problems going on in your life. And then it comes out a little bit. But if that's 1/100th of your life and the other, 99 hundredths of your life is positive, then you're doing really, really good. Most of us don't do that well yet. Most of us just running around a 50-50, most of the time in our day. We're about as angry as we are, negative as we are positive in a day. So that's the answer to that. Yeah, you're all those, and you're growing. And when you looked at yourself and said, what am I doing? Look at me hollering at my kids. Why am I doing that? You see, that was your first step into learning not to do that. You become aware of it, because people who aren't aware of it will not grow up. They don't see that there's a problem. You saw that there was a problem because you're in the process of growing up. That's why you could see there's a problem. Most people hollering at their kids don't have any idea that that's a problem. They just think the kids deserve it and that they deserve better from those kids. So the fact that you were aware of it means that you're on your way to growing and changing things. So you look at it and you say, well, even if I feel bad, I shouldn't take that out on other people. I need to just suck that up and say, all right, right now I feel bad. I have a headache, or my body hurts, or, for some reason you're feeling miserable. I just need to deal with that. I don't need to share it with other people. Okay, I need to deal with it myself, but not take it out on others. And you did that. So I'd say that's very good.
I tried to do that. I did. I tried. I'll try. I'll fight the good fight again. So
yeah, that's
we'll
it. That's it. After you've tried, 4 or 5 or 10 or 100 times, you get it. But hardly anybody just tries once and gets it. Life isn't that simple. We'd all be, enlightened masters if it were that easy. You try and you try and you try and you make a little bit of progress on it. And now, you don't get angry just because you're hungry, but you have to be really, really hungry before you get angry. Well, that's okay. You've pushed that spot back further. Your positiveness is lasting longer now. That's good. That's growth. You see, so it just works one step at a time.
Sure.
You're a lot better than you thought there, Will, right?
Yeah.
Sylvia, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Donna. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Sylvia.
So my question has to do with the kind of, for me, the integration between thinking and being. I think for quite a while, because I happen to be a lot in my analytical mind, it felt like an either or, like I was swapping between the two. Mm-hmm. And then for a while, it felt like actually thinking too much, particularly about your model and thinking about how things work, was actually for me a distraction, because I just had to be, and it actually didn't matter how it worked for a little while. What really mattered was just being and experiencing. But recently I've just been feeling like, wow, the lines are starting to blur between thinking and being, and maybe those aren't even the accurate vocabulary. But I was wondering how you think about the integration, because sometimes thinking about it can pump you into your analytical mind, and that's not helpful. And do you understand the nature of my question? Am I asking it articulately enough? Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. That process of going back and forth, well, now I'm going to be analytical and now I'm going to get into that, and it's an either or, but not a both. That's typically where most of us in our culture, particularly if we tend to be more intellectual, that's where we start with that. Eventually, the more we grow up, the more that line blurs between the two of them, and we kind of see it as all part of one thing. And that's good. Eventually, and you grow up even more, you'll find out that the proportions of the being level and the intellect level that you used to have will swap and be just the opposite. Eventually, you get to the point where 80% of your life is lived out of the being level, and maybe 20% you need your intellect to try to sort things out. You get to that point where being level is your major dominant way that you interact with things. And that's because at that point, you have to have your ego small enough and your beliefs small enough that you hardly ever get upset or angry or feel negativity. Your life is very positive almost all the time. And when you have to do something that is analytical, like find where you left your glasses, or try to figure out how the best way to get to some place in your city, what the best route would be, then you can do that. But it's your intuitive side, your being level tends to dominate after you've grown up more, because the ego and the fear, the ego and the beliefs is what keeps you estranged from that being level. It's what keeps, that's kind of the thing that keeps you just into an intellectual space, is because you can't get into that intuitive space. And if you do get into it, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't seem to be something that's reliable, something that's always accurate and reliable. So you can't really count on it. So you go from, again, in our culture, I think other cultures are probably different, but in our culture, we grow up and we're mostly intellectual, and we live out of our heads. We solve all the problems intellectually, so we think we solve them. But there's an awful lot of things that we just miss, that we just, aren't doing very effectively. And then we grow up and it gets to be the boundary between the two, and you're not really sure, what's going on there. And then they start to meld together. And then pretty soon your life gets more and more intuitive, more and more positive. And there's always reason for an intellect. You always need to assess and analyze. Constantly you have to do this, but that becomes more in the margins. Because once your intuitive side gets to be accurate and reliable, you find out it can come to the answers that analysis is supposed to come to more quickly and more accurately than the analysis does, because the analysis often just doesn't have enough information, whereas the intuition has a lot more information that it can deal with. So it's just part of growing up. That's just the process that we all go through. I went through the same process that you're going through now. I was a physicist. We tend to be hugely intellectual and don't have much use for our intuition. At least that's the way we think, we are. But that's not really so much the way we are. We just don't accept or don't relate to, and tend to we tend to just ignore that part of us that is not intellectual. Yes, we have a lot of non-intellectual parts to us, even when we're very intellectual, but we just ignore them. They're just there, kind of messy stuff that comes along with us in life we just as soon get rid of. And then you learn to embrace it, and then you learn to be it, and then eventually that messy stuff kind of takes over, and your life is much more efficient, and solutions to problems are much easier. So you're just probably where you should be in that transition between dominant intellect, which is just the way our culture, people come up in our culture to be dominant with their intellect, because we value that and we don't value the other very much. But as you grow, it moves the other direction. So let it go. That's natural enough.
Okay, can I just ask a quick follow on?
Sure.
Which is, I think what feels like I'm moving into is from kind of rejecting, like a reactive against the analytical mind. Like, I don't need that. I mean, of course I use it a lot because that's how I'm wired. But in terms of when I think about these things, and then when I'm conscious and present, sort of a rejection, like that's not helping. I need to be this way, and feeling more comfortable in that space, surprisingly. To sort of now just softening and feeling like, oh yeah, sometimes we need that, and it doesn't have to pull you out. Sometimes it can aid you to get back in. And I don't know, it just feels like, I'm trying to just, I guess maybe my analytical mind wants a way to articulate this for myself. That, so it's not a rejection, it's an acceptance that it's there, but not a need to be there.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
I don't.
Yes, just like you said, that thinking so much about the model actually was a problem, because it was forcing you into intellectual space. It's the same way of trying to justify everything that you do and why you do it that way. If you try to justify everything you do and why you do it that way, well, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. That's you trying to do what you think you should be doing, the way you think you should be doing it. That's all intellectual, and that gets in the way. Yeah. So you need to just let that go and stop trying to do it and just be it without doing it. And yes, that's a big step. It's a big transition from somebody who was, doing everything, purposefully managing everything, to the point that you stop that and you just start being. And you'll find that you tend to be more positive when you're just being. And a lot of the negative things come out of that trying to justify, trying to analyze, trying to make it intellectual when it really isn't. It's funny that people who live out of their heads feel like they are very intellectual and that they're very logical, and they're living their life, with good insight and logic. That's the way they feel. And it just isn't true at all. That's just a belief that they have. They're not logical at all. They just think they're logical. Well, okay, I see all these things and I'm going to do this. Well, the why you do this is because that's what felt good. That's why you do this. And then you justify doing it. And that justification, you look at it and say, oh yeah, I'm being logical. See there, I could justify it. But that's not really the reason that most people do the things they do. They do them because the being level pushes them this way or that way. Their ego, their fear, their beliefs are just shoving them around. And then they, in hindsight, justify it with their intellect, and then they call themselves logical. That's typically the way life works. So we're not nearly as logical. Humans are not logical beings for the most part. There's very little that people do that's logical, because logic requires a lot of information. We don't have a lot of information. So we get a few bits of information, and then we go down into being level and ask our ego and our beliefs, what would feel good, and that's what we do. And then we justify it and claim that we're always logical. So that's the thing that it's transition really between being in that intellectual space and not just letting the being level space go. Because one of the reasons that letting the being level space kind of take charge of your life is that we feel a fear of not being in control. If I do that, then I'm not in control. If I think about it and I can justify it logically, then I'm in control. I'm doing it for these reasons, because of this, that, and the other thing. That makes you feel safer. That's better. When you say, I'm just doing it because it feels good, that intellectual part of you goes, no, that's not going to work. You're going to walk off a cliff. That's terrible. Get your intellect in charge and figure it out. So we don't feel safe. We don't feel relaxed with just being in the being level because we don't trust it. And building up trust takes a while, and it's just time.
I think I'm getting comfortable with that. I just feel I feel more disoriented than I do. Mm-hmm. It's just like, oh, this is like this feels different. It's more disorienting, I think, is how I'm feeling.
It is.
Yeah.
It is disorienting because it's just not the way you're used to being.
Yeah. But I am a lot more positive. So there you go.
There you go.
Good trade-off. Anyway, thank you so much, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Sylvia. Michael, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. My question is about parallel processing while meditating. So I've noticed that as I get better at meditating and holding my attention on a mantra for longer periods of time, I'm finding it a bit harder to track when my mind is off the mantra. In the beginning, it used to be simple. I would accidentally completely stop and forget about the mantra and be fully attached to some other stream of thoughts. Then sometime later have an, oh wait, I was supposed to be meditating moment. But now I can be repeating my mantra and briefly notice all sorts of little thoughts bubbling up. I do not attach my full awareness to them, and my mantra is still continuing. It is almost like I am parallel processing my mantra, while also another part of me is noticing thoughts come and go, and perhaps another tiny part of me is also still tracking what is happening to my PMR body. Sometimes these thoughts can even turn into little dream sequences or whatever sort of NPMR data stream label that would be appropriate. In response, I've tried intensifying the mantra to make it my sole point of focus, but that can make it feel like I'm trying too hard, which I think can be counterproductive. But if I let go and soften the mantra too much, I end up losing it entirely to some random thought stream, or perhaps even a daydream or something that may not have been too productive. So I'm in a bit of a experimental phase here with a bit of confusion on how to set my intent in these situations. So like for reference, on a good day, I can keep myself focused on the mantra for 4 or 5 minutes. And I feel like my goal should be around 20 to 30 reliably. I think that was originally the recommendation, but still kind of wonder how to deal with the transition away from it.
Okay, Mike, there's a couple of things going on here. One, just as we were talking to Sylvia last time, you're overanalyzing. You're trying to intellectualize everything that's going on to a point that it starts to get in the way. Because when you overanalyze, pretty soon you usually get yourself twisted up into a tangle of well, this says that way, that says the other way, and then you end up getting confused. You end up confusing yourself with too much analysis. There's a few things going on. One is that you should be using your meditation to develop mental discipline. That's really its point, is to develop mental discipline. So you should be able to eventually do 20 or 30 minutes, or even 40, but at least 30 minutes of being without thoughts. Now, it'll take time. That's not something that most people find easy. That's something that takes effort, and you have to try it and be focused on it. If your meditation is something that you don't really focus on, you just do it because you do it, and you're not really focused on just hanging out in mental space, then it'll take longer. If you're really focused on making progress, then progress will come a lot quicker. But that's one thing that's going on. So you should do that. But besides that, the mantra is just a tool to help you practice that discipline. Just a tool. Eventually, you want to let the mantra go. You want to be able to sit down, let your mind empty out, be blank, and either stay that way or start doing other things with it. Start healing somebody, or start assessing major choices that you have, trying to figure out what the low entropy path is, or all kinds of things you can be doing. Some branches in Buddhism have the idea that meditation is to stay in that empty state, period, until you just get to that empty state, and you've done that long enough and you're so relaxed there that you just sit there with a smile on your face and be connected to the larger system. You're just a piece of consciousness and with the system. And that's the whole point of meditation. And any thoughts that you may have are counterproductive. Well, that's just a narrow aspect of it. In my philosophy, getting to that point consciousness state is getting to the launch pad. It's just getting to where you can use your mind to do other things that are helpful and useful. That's where the action starts, not the end of the game. That's the beginning. And the meditation is just required discipline that you need to have in order to then do things that are useful when you get to that state. Because if your mind isn't disciplined, then you'll never be very effective at doing any of those things you might want to do, like healing or solving problems or helping or making someone feel more positive, or understanding complex things, solving not only personal problems, but problems at work. You can do lots of things in that state where you're in the intuitive space. Creative space, being more creative from that space. So you want to be able to let the mantra go and let your mind go off on things, but you want to do it as you direct it, not just as it wanders around aimlessly. See, that's where the discipline comes in. The discipline comes in, so you want to be able to let the mantra go off and do things with your mind, but your mind has to be clearly focused and stable and on task, and not be bouncing around all over the place. So the stray stuff that just comes in, that's the bouncing around all over the place, and that distracts from your ability to be effective when you're in that intuitive state. So practice with your meditation to where you can make that longer, that 4 or 5 minutes, go up to 6 minutes or 7, and just practice that with an intent to do it. And you're just learning discipline. That's all. And discipline comes with practice and with desire. You need to really want to end up with that discipline. But if your mind wanders, I'd say in the beginning, always bring it back and to practice your discipline. Let's say you get to where you can keep it for 10 minutes. Now that you're at 10 minutes, now as your mind wanders, it might be better rather than just grabbing it and grabbing that thought and throwing it away and going back to your mantra. It might be worthwhile at 10 minutes to say, well, what is it that's come into my mind? Is it something important for me? Is it something I should look at? And if it is, then head on down that rabbit hole and see what's there. If it isn't, push it away. Because after 10 minutes, you may be getting things. You may have enough discipline at that point to go off on those trips, but still work the discipline until you can get it up to a half hour or so. Still work on that, but you don't have to do that. It's not like you have to march in that direction to get it all the way up to 30 minutes before you can go do anything with it. You can do things with it right in the beginning. You just won't be as effective, but you can do things with it. So I'd say you're on your way, 4 or 5 minutes, 6, 7 minutes, 10, it comes to you. Look at it and say, is that just garbage? And start thinking about, just pieces of stuff in my life, my intellect, just gonna, start to, crunch on something's going on or reliving a moment. And if it's just junk, random thoughts, well, then push them away. But if it's not junk, go ahead and follow it. It may take you someplace interesting. So do both. You have to learn the discipline, but you also have to learn to follow those things that come to you. Because a lot of times when there's things you need to think about or things you need to work on, the system will stick it in your mind to do that. So you don't want to just throw those things away. You want to look at them and say, is that fundamental? Is that on my way to learning? And if it's like, well, I don't think so, then back to work. But if it is, say, well, okay, I'll follow it. And maybe you'll follow it for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes and it'll turn into nothing. Well, then put it aside and go back, do your discipline. So be gentle with it. So it's when the intellect wants to do it right, the intellect's always asking itself, am I doing it right? Should I, not do it this way? When those thoughts come, should I always push them away? I don't know. I don't know how to do it right. I need somebody to tell me what's just the right way to do it. Well, that's your intellect grinding too much on the problem. That's overanalysis. Just do it. If it works and you're growing and you're getting better, well, that's okay. Even if after 2 minutes you find a thread that's interesting and you go off and do it and then come back later, that's okay. Are you growing? So don't make it too like it has to be this way to be right. And anything that's not like this is not right. That's much too narrow and much too many constraints. Let it be organic. Sometimes you'll sit down and you'll only be meditating for 1 minute and something will pop into your mind and that's something you should follow. That's something important for you to follow. So go follow it. 5 minutes later, when you're done with it, come back and start your discipline up again. So there's no reason that you can't do all of it. It's okay to do all of it. It'll take you a little longer. If all you do is work on discipline, well, you'll get there quicker than if you don't. But if you work on all of it, when you do get there, you'll be a lot better off because you'll also have a lot of experience of sorting out the stuff that's useful from the stuff that's not. So just let it flow however it does. Keep working, keep a good intent, and don't worry too much about the details. There's not really a right way and a wrong way. It's just the way that works for you is the best way for you.
Yeah, overanalysis is definitely definitely an issue. And yeah, that's what my intuition was saying as well. It's just yeah, it gets a little bit tricky sometimes. Like I do Tom's Park, and I do have some success for that for sure. But then I've found my mind doesn't quite have enough discipline to keep going. So after a few minutes, I'll lose it. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm kind of partitioning this is my meditation kind of discipline time, and then some Tom's Park time. But yeah, and then there's sometimes when I'm meditating, I'll just kind of explore something, and that's also productive. But also sometimes it's just junk. So I'm kind of in this. It's kind of like a muddy process, I guess, right now for me.
It is a muddy process. That's because of where you are. 5 years from now, it won't be nearly as muddy as it is now, but it'll still be muddier than where it's going to be 10 years from now. So it's just a process as you gradually, get rid of the junk and follow up the good stuff.
Thank you.